When the first settlers came to the Palouse, every river, stream, and creek was lined with native grasses, shrubs, and trees. Wildlife was abundant, and the watercourses held fish and numerous other aquatic creatures. They were complete, functioning ecosystems. What we see today is a totally different picture, with the trees and riparian areas all but gone, replaced with fields of crops or livestock grazing, in many areas right up to the edge of, and even in the water. As a result, water quality is degraded, and severe soil erosion is affecting the future capacity of crop production. Understanding and acknowledging the importance of preventing soil erosion and reestablishing riparian areas is the first step toward making agriculture on the Palouse truly sustainable. Fortunately, there are progressive farmers and ranchers in the region that are willing to reevaluate and adjust their operations. They may not be working on the same time frames, but whatever they do, it's their decision and the right one for their operation as they take voluntary, proactive steps on the crawl, walk, run journey toward riparian buffer establishment and sustainability.
It was sink or swim, and we knew that the Department of Ecology was going around to different cattle ranches, and it just made me really think about what can we do to be proactive instead of reactive. That's why I went to the Conservation District. I had a visit with Dan. As far as what we want to do and get this program going, working with your Conservation District is the most important thing. We've got a low bank in parts of the creek, over 400 yards at least, where we have flooding issues, and we don't want to go in and disturb the creek itself, but we do want to dig the bank out, establish some type of a dike, and then plant it back to grass, possibly plant some trees in there and put it back into kind of a riparian area. You want as much ground as possible for your cows or grain and hay, but 35 feet is what we're kind of shooting for. If we have to, I know there's some spots where we're going to end up with 50, maybe 100 feet taken out. It's just whatever's going to make it easier to fence for us, especially since we're doing cows. Other than that, I'd just like to stick in that 35 to 50 foot range. Don't want to take as much money from the government as we can. We like to do it on our own, that way we do have some say-so in it. But at the same time, I am starting to look at some of these programs, especially the EQIP program, planting some trees and kind of rehabilitating the habitat that was once here. We do have a spring here. At one time somebody had run pipe to it. I don't know without diving into it right away what we're going to run into, but it is a possibility of developing that if it's not considered a wetland. I would like some access to the creek just in case of emergency. We do have one designated area here that we'd like to keep as a place for cows to water, but I'd also wouldn't be opposed to sinking some wells in, putting in some solar powered pumps. I think that's a pretty good way of watering the cows also. We've got a place on the Palouse River and Rock Creek we're going to have some issues with, I'm sure, down the road. I'd like to see, some of the old springs that are there developed. Get the cows pretty much off the river is my goal. I know it's a source of good water for those cattle, but it's an unnecessary source with these springs that we have and the potential to develop others. As far as Rock Creek goes, we're going to keep alfalfa along the edge of that and keep the buffer that's there already. Some of the older ranchers that are around, I see them having a problem with change. You're going to have to develop these systems, work with your conservation district, do what you can to move on and get past that idea that, well, this is mine and this is how Dad did it 100 years ago and this is the way I'm going to keep doing it. We got to evolve. That's what agriculture is about. Look at the crops we're raising now. We've increased our bushels, we've increased our hay, and we've increased our cows by doing some of the newer technologies that are out there. And this is just another tool, although it's a mandatory tool in a lot of ways, but it is a tool that I see that guys can utilize.
We took this farm over, 3 or 4 years ago. It was completely conventional tillage and had a lot of erosion issues. So we started kind of from scratch saying, how do we want to proceed through grass buffers or getting trees on highly erodible areas or riparian zones around streams. So we've kind of taken the slow approach the last couple years. We've gotten a lot of trees in some of the steeper ground and stopped some of that erosion from our eyebrows. And our next steps will be looking around the creek beds and trying to get some of that erosion stopped, along with some of the seepage of fertilizer and chemical. Erosion was a big issue here when we started. That was the start of the process, but For me, in a no-till situation, I try and keep the erosion to a minimum anyway, but to stop the erosion on the places that we're not farming, or how can we control the erosion in an event like we had this last spring where I think everything eroded because of the frozen ground and the rainfall and the snow, but the majority of it was just erosion control and taking out unproductive areas. The plan is to put a buffer zone between the crop and the streams, and I can tell you prior to us taking this farm over, it was Roundup along all string banks and we had erosion to the max. So our plan is to kind of make it a smoother contour and come out 35 to 50 feet and make a buffer around those. My dad always told me all these creeks were lined with willow trees, and that's exactly what I want to bring back. And I think it's just such a great advantage to the stream beds to have those trees in the bottoms, and the wildlife love them, and I just think it makes the country in general that much more beautiful. Most of my landlords, they love the aesthetic piece of it. They love coming out here and seeing farmland and trees, and they just think it adds so much beauty, but also they know the benefits of whether it's wildlife, erosion, all the benefits that come along with trees. They're 100% behind it. I've taken a lot of landlords on crop tours. The first thing I do is say, look at this place. Think of the value that these trees have grown. You got deer running all over, and you don't have the ugly slides on highly erodible ground. I mean, it's just the future of just trees in general, I think, is important. We have used the resources available, whether it's AmeriCorps or the prisoners, to come out and plant the trees, which is huge. I haven't lifted a finger to get trees on this land. They pick the trees, they plant them for you, and you get to enjoy the benefit. We planted 5,000 trees.
The E1 property has pasture adjoining farm ground that has a stream running through it. For us, the stream running through it was kind of a boundary to get to a small acreage on the other side, and for a long time we thought, well, we can make a little more money probably farming it, but we couldn't go through the creek because the crossing was impassable. So getting around there was becoming more difficult all the time. So we looked into avenues of conservation and not having to get there. So we looked into the program and found it fit two needs. One, in the farm ground, we could buffer the creek, and so we put grass on both sides of the creek, but our property went too far away from the creek, so we put a little wildlife habitat in the north side of the creek along with the buffer. And then you go down the stream and you're in pasture ground, and we keep our cows out of the water as much as we can where it's feasible without too much, if the water isn't too far away, if there's a way to get water to the cows. So that kind of led to a project that went from farm ground through pasture ground, that we fenced the creek off. We made water from the creek to get up for the cattle, and made a wildlife project there too. And just kind of, it was every project all rolled into one. Turned out well, I think. When we were ready to implement it, wasn't very long. It was well under a year, but just the process of deciding what you want to do and how it's going to fit takes a little longer than that. But once you've made your decision and find out the programs that will work for you, only a couple, 3 months is really the duration of the process. There was just a small piece in the farm ground that wasn't applicable to a buffer or a filter strip, and wildlife stepped in with some funding, and we planted some native grasses and within the CRP stand to qualify that as a wildlife project. I didn't expect some of the results really as far as how it really turns out, and it's really been nice. I think as far as keeping the cattle off the creek and get those riparian buffers in place, I'd much rather be working with DOE than working to solve a problem later. I really think that's the direction we're going to go. Is once we get through the cooperation stage, I think there'll be an implementation stage where it's a you will or else, and I'd prefer to be in the cooperation stage.
The producers featured in this program have one thing in common: a desire to have a sustainable operation by protecting water quality and preventing the loss of the only thing they have to grow with, their precious topsoil. They understand we cannot continue to farm at the expense of our soil and water. They may be doing it by different means and at their own pace, but the end result will be the same: a financially and environmentally sustainable operation.